"This seat is taken," Thea said, and the man looked up at her the way people look up at weather they've already decided not to argue with. "I know," he said. "I took it." She had the leather reservation card in her hand and a full afternoon's worth of polite persistence behind her, and she stood there while the lobby bar went on humming around them. Ice turning in glasses, the muted piano from the mezzanine, the low particular sound a hotel makes when it's full of people pretending they don't need anything. And for one strange moment, the whole of it went far away. Because he'd said her name, quietly, just before she could turn to leave. The way you say a word you've been practicing for months in private. She hadn't worn her name tag. It was tucked in her jacket pocket because the clip had broken 2 weeks ago, and she hadn't replaced it. The Carrington didn't make a fuss about name tags the way other hotels did. And yet, "Miss Ravell," he said again, "please, sit down." Rewind 4 hours, to the early part of a Thursday in November, when the sky over Bay Street was the color of old dishwater, and the hotel was 3/4 full, and Thea Ravell was at the concierge desk trying to get symphony tickets for a man who'd left it until the last hour, and seemed genuinely surprised this was a problem. She'd worked the Carrington for 8 months, long enough to know which guests wanted conversation and which wanted efficiency, which regulars liked to be remembered, and which found it intrusive. Long enough to know that the lobby smelled of cedar and warm wool on cold days, that the elevator to the 8th floor stuck between 6 and 7 if you held the door too long, that the couple in 412 were celebrating something sad, an anniversary of something lost, she thought, from the way they held hands in the lift without speaking. She was good at reading rooms. That was the thing people said first about Thea. The way she read a situation before anyone had to explain it. Her wrists steady, her voice low, her smile the kind that worked on tired people and frightened people, and people who were trying very hard not to be either. She was 32, with dark hair she wore in a knot at the back of her neck, and a face that didn't give much away. She'd trained it that way. That was the other thing people eventually noticed, that Thea Ravell was very good at not flinching. Mr. Ford found her at the desk at 2:15. Ford was a narrow man with impeccable timing, and the particular authority of someone who had decided long ago that being quietly correct was more efficient than being loud. "The Churchill Lounge," he said, and he said it the way he said most things, as a complete sentence without further decoration. "Corner booth, reserved from noon. The gentleman arrived at 11:50 and hasn't ordered a thing. He's asked for the check." Thea looked up from the symphony file. "A check for nothing. He hasn't ordered anything. No food, no drink. He sat down, set his phone face down, and has been watching the entrance to the corridor for 3 hours. Watching for who? That's rather the question. Ford smoothed a cuff. He's booked the booth until 6. When he asked for the check just now, he told the server to send the concierge, specifically the concierge, not the manager, not the host. He paused. He used your name. Thea set down the symphony file. "My name." "Yours." Ford's expression did not shift. It never did. "Miss Ravell, I've been managing this hotel for 11 years. When a guest who arrived before his reservation ordered nothing for 3 hours and then requests a member of staff by name, I prefer to know if there's context I'm missing." "There isn't," Thea said. "None that I know of." She almost believed herself. The Churchill Lounge sat at the back of the lobby level, separated from the main floor by a low mahogany partition, and the sense that conversations held there were not meant to carry. Thea had walked that route so many times she could have done it in the dark. Past the painting of the harbour that someone's grandmother had donated 40 years ago, and no one had the heart to replace. Past the coat check around the corner where the heating vent groaned on cold days. The corner booth was the best in the room. Most guests wanted the ones by the window. This one was set back from everything, with a straight view of the door and enough distance from the next table that you could speak at a normal volume and be heard only by the person across from you. A man sat alone in it, 40, maybe, or close to it. Dark jacket, open collar, a glass of still water he hadn't touched. He was not what the word corporate would have called up, and not what wealthy called up either, though Thea would learn soon enough he was the second thing. He was tired in a particular way, not from lack of sleep. From something that sleep had stopped fixing a long time ago. She set the leather folder at the edge of the table, and he didn't look at it. "Mr. Lacey," she said, because she had looked at the reservation when Ford sent her. "Mr. Ford says you've asked for your check." "I have," he said. He turned the water glass a quarter turn on the linen. "You haven't ordered anything." "No." "I can bring you something." The kitchen's still serving." "That's very kind." He looked up. His eyes were dark and level. Not unkind, just contained, the way some people are when they've spent a long time keeping something from showing. "But I'm not here for the food. I'm here for a conversation. And I was hoping—" He stopped, started again lower. "I was told you'd be on today." Thea was quiet for a moment. She had a folder in one hand and 3 more guests waiting back at the desk. And the reasonable thing was to tell this man she'd send the manager and return to her afternoon. She knew the feeling of reasonable. She'd built her whole life on it, carefully, for 8 months. "How do you know my name?" she said instead. Something shifted in the contained face. Not relief, not quite. The way a door opens on a room you've been standing outside for a long time. "Sit down," he said, "and I'll tell you." She sat on the edge of the chair, both hands flat on the table, the folder on the seat beside her like a shield she hadn't put down yet. His name was Emmett Lacey. She knew it from the reservation, but he said it plainly anyway, no performance attached to it. The way people say things they've decided are just facts. He owned Lacey Holdings. She'd heard of it. Everyone in Toronto had heard of it. The crane on the skyline, with the Lacey name on the construction netting. The towers going up on the waterfront. He said it the way another man might mention he owned an umbrella. Only relevant if it rained. 5 months ago, he said, on a night in early June when the parkade under the hotel had been opened to the public during the waterfront festival. His grandfather had been walking alone to meet the car. The driver had circled the block twice trying to find a spot. His grandfather was 75, and too proud to wait on the sidewalk, and had cut through the parkade to save time, and somewhere between level 2 and level 1 his legs had stopped holding him, and he'd gone down against the concrete pillar near the stairwell door. 20 people walked past on the street above. The festival was loud. A woman found him. She was cutting through the parkade on her way to work. Late from the way she moved, Emmett said. She had a bag over one shoulder and she was walking fast, and then she wasn't walking at all. She was on her knees on the concrete with his grandfather's head in her hands, asking him his name in a voice so steady, it didn't sound like anything was wrong. She kept him talking. She knew the questions. Not the ones people ask when they're frightened, the scattered "is he okay? Can you hear me?" questions, but the specific ones. His name, the date, where he felt the tightness. She got the 911 call in before Emmett's own driver had noticed anything was wrong. She told the dispatcher things the paramedics later said had mattered. The duration, the exact complaint, the color of his face. She took off her jacket and put it under his head. When the paramedics came and the gurney rolled, she stepped back. Someone asked her name. The festival crowd surged, and she was gone. "No name," Emmett said. "No number. Nothing on the security footage that was useful. Our angle was wrong. She had her back to the camera the whole time. Dark hair. A green work lanyard with nothing legible on the badge." He turned the water glass again, a half rotation. "I've been looking for 5 months." Thea's hands were flat on the table. She'd placed them there deliberately when she sat down, and she made herself keep them still. She remembered June. She remembered the festival traffic and the wrong bus, and the fact that she was already 12 minutes late when she took the parkade shortcut. She remembered the sound of the man going down before she'd rounded the pillar. A sound she'd trained herself to recognize, without knowing she was doing it. She remembered the shaking of his hands and the way he'd said Margaret when she asked him who to call. She'd used that name to keep him present, over and over, gently, like a rope someone could hold on to. She'd left because the ambulance doors had closed, and a stranger in the crowd had grabbed her arm to ask what had happened, and she'd said he's going to be fine and stepped back into the festival noise and kept walking. Not because she didn't care, because staying to be thanked meant staying. Staying meant being found, and being found meant questions she'd spent 8 months very carefully not answering. "That was your grandfather," she said, "not a question." "Rupert." Emmett's voice went plain when he said it. "Rupert Lacey, 75. Still argues with his cardiologist about red meat and wins about half the time. Something raw and careful broke through the plainness of it. He's alive. Because you found him 8 minutes before anyone else on that street would have." The lounge went on around them. Someone ordered something sparkling at the bar, and the cork made the small festive sound of a world that had no idea. "How did you find me?" Thea said. "The lanyard. Our security team pulled the festival vendor lists, the conference schedules for the building, and the employee rosters for every hotel within 3 blocks. The Carrington came up. A woman matching the description who works concierge, started 8 months ago, has her emergency first aid recertification current." He met her eyes. And Mr. Ford, who has managed this building for 11 years, mentioned last month that his best concierge had the calmest voice he'd ever heard under pressure. I asked if she had a green lanyard. He went very quiet. He paused. He took a day to decide before he called me back. Thea thought of Ford, who smoothed his cuff when he was processing something difficult, who'd sent her over here with his face giving nothing away. He took a day. Ford had waited a full day. She loved him a little for that without intending to. He's all right, Emmett said again, differently. My grandfather. He wants. A muscle moved in his jaw. He's the reason I didn't simply walk up to the desk and say thank you right away. He said if I did that, you'd smile and deflect and we'd never have a real conversation. He said I had to give you a reason to stay. The ghost of something crossed his face. He was right. I could see it 2 minutes ago when I said your name. You were already thinking about how to leave. Thea said nothing. Her hands were still. I'm not going to embarrass you, Emmett said. I know you didn't do it for thanks. That's exactly why I needed to say it. Thank you, Thea. My grandfather is going to see Christmas because you didn't walk past him. I've practiced that sentence for 4 months, and I kept getting it wrong in rehearsal. I think it's right now. The heating vent groaned somewhere behind the partition. The piano on the mezzanine changed keys, and a table near the window laughed about something and came back to their menus. For a long moment, she didn't trust her voice to stay the steady thing she needed it to be. And beneath her hands, beneath the carefully ordinary surface of an ordinary Thursday, something old and heavier shifted a 1/4 inch in her chest. You're welcome, she said. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. It was the one thing the last 18 months hadn't taken. And I should get back to the desk. He nodded. He'd expected it. She could see he had. He'd prepared himself to let her stand and disappear a second time, and he was honoring it without argument. She put one hand on the table's edge, her weight already shifting toward standing. One more thing, he said, and then you go. She waited. The lanyard you were wearing that night had a logo on it. Our team couldn't read it, but my grandfather remembered. A blue cross on white. He watched her hands on the table, not her face, and the not looking at face was somehow worse than looking would have been. He has a very good memory for things people would rather he forgot. He said it was the Meridian First Response logo. Thea's hands stopped being still. That's a private emergency services company, Emmett said. I know because Lacey Holdings had a contract with them for medical coverage at our construction sites. I know because the company went through a significant internal review 18 months ago. And I know because last week, Mr. Ford quietly told me that his best concierge had worked in emergency services and didn't like to talk about why she'd stopped. He looked up then. His dark, level eyes held something careful and deliberate. I'm not asking. I told myself I wouldn't. But I have a grandfather who asks me every few days if I've found the woman with the green lanyard yet. And I have this. He set something on the linen between them. It was her lanyard. The Meridian First Response badge with its Blue Cross logo, faded from months of all-weather wear. Rupert Lacey, it turned out, had held on to the one piece of evidence she'd left behind without meaning to. He wouldn't let anyone throw it away, Emmett said. He keeps it in the drawer by his chair. His nurse finds it very inconvenient. Thea looked at the lanyard for a long moment. Then she picked up her folder. Thank your grandfather for me, she said. And thank you for finding me. She was 2 steps away when he said quietly, There's a foundation, the Lacey Foundation. My grandmother started it. We fund 7 community health programs across the city. Every single one of them is under-resourced. And I have spent 5 months thinking about the fact that whatever happened with Meridian, the person who was on the ground next to my grandfather knew exactly what she was doing. And I can't stop thinking about that. She stopped, did not turn. I'm not offering charity, Emmett said. I'm offering a conversation, once, any day this week. No obligation, no reserved tables. The corner of his mouth moved, though she couldn't see it. You can even bring Mr. Ford as a chaperone. He'd wear the tie. The corner of her own mouth moved despite herself, alone in the corridor. I don't do that anymore, she said. Any of it. Emergency services, first response. The clinical side of anything. There's a reason and it isn't going to change over a well-meaning offer. All right, he said, quietly, without pushing. It's a no. I'll live with a no. She walked back to the concierge desk. She helped a woman find a walking route that wouldn't be icy by evening. She called a car for the couple in 412. She did not look at the Churchill Lounge again. At 6 o'clock she saw him leave. He tucked the chair in neatly before he went. the way people do when they've been raised to think about who comes after them. He left something on the table that the server would later report was $120 for nothing ordered. Solene was waiting at the end of the shift, leaning against the staff room door with the expression of a woman who had been professionally restraining herself for 4 hours. "Emmett Lacey," Solene said as a complete sentence. He was thanking me for something I did months ago. Emmett Lacey sat in the Churchill lounge for 6 hours to thank a concierge. He waited for his check. He didn't order anything. "Exactly," Thea said, and Solene made a sound of profound frustration and let her go. Rupert Lacey turned up the following Tuesday. Not Emmett. Rupert. He arrived in a town car with a driver who was clearly used to not arguing. And he came through the lobby doors at 10 in the morning, in a wool overcoat 2 decades out of fashion, and the expression of a man who had not once in 75 years permitted inconvenient timing to slow him down. He found Thea at the concierge desk before anyone could intercept him. "You're the one," he said without preamble. "I'd know those hands anywhere. A person's hands give them away. Doctors always forget that." He settled an elbow on the desk with the ease of a man who had been leaning on things his whole life. "My grandson tells me you said no to everything he offered." "Good. He's too careful. He should have come himself instead of sending a list of programs." He looked at her directly. "You kept me awake on a concrete floor for 11 minutes. Do you know how long 11 minutes is? When someone's talking to you about your granddaughter's hockey game in the middle of a parking garage." Against everything, Thea felt the corner of her mouth move. "I needed the distraction," she said. It worked. His eyes, bright, sharp as a letter opener, moved over her face. "You were a first responder." "I used to be." "Used to." He turned the phrase over as though tasting it for accuracy. "My cardiologist uses that phrase. Used to be able to have the steak. It's a very small coffin for a very large thing." He studied her. "My grandson didn't ask why. He promised me he wouldn't. I, however, made no such promise." He held up a hand before she could speak. "But I'm not going to ask either. I'm too old to extract things from people who've decided not to give them. What I will do is invite you to lunch. Saturday, my house. Emmett will be there, which you can take or leave, and my granddaughter will be there, which I'm told is non-negotiable." He wrote the address on a card from his overcoat pocket. He carried actual cards, the heavy cream kind, and set it on the desk. "Come if you'd like. But I'm going to tell you that the woman who asked me Margaret's name so I wouldn't slip under, I've thought about her every day since June. It would do me good to have a proper conversation with her, at my table, with real food." He straightened, buttoning his coat. "The hotel food is excellent. It's not the point." He left before she could answer. She went to lunch. The house was in Rosedale. Old brick, deep porch, a garden that was brown and bare in November but clearly meant something in other months. The kind of house that had absorbed 5 decades of a family without trying to show it. Emmett opened the door. He looked different from the hotel, less contained or differently contained. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm and he'd clearly just come from something involving a dishpan. He stepped back immediately to give her room. "He railroaded you," Emmett said. "He invited me very politely." "He invites everyone very politely. It has the same effect as railroading." He paused. "I told him not to." "You told him you'd found me and not to come," Thea said, "and then he came anyway." Within 36 hours. He's efficient. The ghost of a smile reached a little further this time than it had in the lounge. "He is." He stood aside. "Come in. He's in the sitting room arguing about whether the game starts at 3 or 3:30, and he's going to be delighted you're here." Rupert was delighted. He put her in the better chair, the one that caught the afternoon light, a detail Warren would have approved, and held court for 90 minutes, with the energy of a man who'd been told to rest and found the instruction philosophically unconvincing. He asked about Toronto, about the hotel, about what she thought of the Leafs with the cheerful confidence of someone who assumes all Torontonians have opinions on hockey and has never once been wrong. He did not ask about Meridian. He came near it once, mentioned that his own brother had been a paramedic 40 years ago, and when Thea's face did the small closed thing it did, he turned the conversation in another direction so smoothly she almost didn't notice. Almost. It was, she thought, the most comfortable interrogation she'd survived in a long time. Emmett's cousin Adrian arrived at 4. She came through the front door with the particular energy of someone who owns the schedule. Mid-40s, dark hair, a folio under her arm and a phone she held like a tool rather than a device. She ran the Lacey Foundation. Thea understood that from 2 minutes of observation before anyone said a word, the way she moved through the house, checking things without appearing to check them. "Rupert," she said, kissing his temple, "you weren't supposed to have guests today." "I have exactly one guest," Rupert said, "and she is exactly the right one. Adrian, this is Thea Ravell. Thea, my niece Adrian. She runs the foundation and has done so for 9 years, and she's very good at it and entirely too suspicious of everyone." Adrian smiled. It was a good smile, practiced in the way that good smiles get when they've been used in professional settings for a long time. "Thea Ravell," she said, the concierge. Something in her eyes did a quick inventory. Hem to hairline. "I feel like I know the name." "I don't think we've met." "No," she tilted her head, "but I'm very good with names." She stayed long enough for tea, and then drew Thea to the end of the hallway, while Rupert's granddaughter arrived and created a distraction with hockey scores. The hallway smelled of old wood and the kind of cooking that happens every day without occasion. Adrian stood with her back to the window and came to the point with the efficiency of someone who billed her time carefully. "I'll be direct," she said, "because I think you'll appreciate it more than the alternative. You've made an impression on this family very quickly. Rupert doesn't invite anyone, and Emmett, she let the pause do its work. Emmett has been distracted for months. He is never distracted." Thea waited. "I protect this family," Adrian said. 9 years of protecting the Lacey name from people who see it and see opportunity. "I'm not calling you that person. I'm telling you that from where I'm standing, the most honest woman in the world and a very good actress look exactly alike, and it is my whole job to tell them apart." The late November light came grey through the hallway window. Somewhere in the sitting room, Rupert laughed at something. "You used to work for Meridian First Response," Adrian said. "Not a question. I know because we had a contract with them for site medical coverage. I know because I've been doing due diligence this week, quietly, on the woman Emmett has been looking for since June. And I know because the Meridian internal review 18 months ago is a matter of semi-public record, and your name is in it." Thea's hands were in her jacket pockets. She kept them there. "You don't know anything about why I left," she said. "Not yet." Adrian's voice stayed pleasant, "but I'm going to find it, and I would rather hear it from you now gently. Because if I find it myself, I won't be gentle. And I'll bring it to Emmett, wrapped up kindly, and it'll be a lie made out of true things, and everyone will think they're being protected." She spread her hands. "I don't want that. If you're exactly what you appear to be, then we'll be very good friends. But if there's something in your history that could embarrass this family, I would so much rather hear it from you than find it on my own." She paused. "And I always find things." A car pulled up in the drive, Emmett, coming from somewhere. Adrian's expression brightened without warming. "There's Emmett," she said pleasantly. "Think about what you want to tell me." And she was already moving toward the door. Thea did not go home. She stood on the front porch of Rupert Lacey's house in November, with her hands in her pockets, and her heart going at the particular hard, slow pace she'd learned to recognize, the same pace it had in the worst calls, when the doors opened and everything was already going wrong, and she did the arithmetic she hadn't let herself do in 18 months. The Lacey Foundation, community health programs, Meridian First Response, which had been a Lacey Holdings contract, the internal review that had ended with a settlement and her resignation, and a clause that said if she ever disclosed the events of a particular Sunday night call, she would lose the one thing they'd given her in exchange for leaving quietly, the right to disappear. The man at the call had been a construction worker at a Lacey Holdings site, Gerald, 44, with a wife and 2 daughters. His presentation had been clear to Thea. She'd flagged it 3 times in the call log, had radioed the supervising physician with her assessment, had been overridden and told to follow the standard protocol. She'd documented her warning first and then followed the order, because that was the job. You flagged it. You wrote it down. And then you did what the physician said, because the alternative was a paramedic who decided she knew better than the doctor, and nobody wanted to be that story. Gerald's heart had not started again in the ambulance. The review had called it a clinical communication failure and found the paramedic most proximate to the outcome. Proximate. She'd learned what that word could do in a boardroom. It meant nearest. It meant convenient. They'd given her a folder and a settlement and a clause and the right to disappear. And she had signed it because she was 29 and they had 6 lawyers, and she had a green lanyard and a truth that nobody in that room was interested in hearing. Emmett came up the walk and stopped when he saw her face. "What did she say?" he said. Thea looked at him. At the man who had sat in a hotel lounge for 6 hours, who had not pushed when she said no, who had said I'm not asking and kept his word through an entire conversation. At the man whose family's contract had built the site where Gerald had been working, whose cousin was even now deciding what shape to make the truth before she handed it over. She's going to find something, Thea said, about Meridian, about why I left. Then tell me first, Emmett said, whatever it is, before she does. She almost didn't. She was very good at not doing reckless things. 8 months of careful and contained, and no one finds anything. She had the street at her back and a taxi that would come in 3 minutes if she called for it. She didn't call the taxi. She told him instead, there on the porch of his grandfather's house, with the November dark coming in off the ravine and the sound of hockey commentary muffled through the sitting room window. She told him about the Sunday night call. She told him about Gerald, about his name, about his daughters, about the way he'd told her during the call that he was worried about getting home for his youngest one's birthday. She told him about the flagged log entries and the supervising physician's override and the document she'd written 3 times before she wrote what she'd been told to write, each entry time-stamped, each one still existing, somewhere in a file she'd been paid to never discuss. The Lacey Holdings site, she said. That's where Gerald worked. Your company, your contract with Meridian. Your cousin is going to find the review because it connects to the Foundation's records, and she's going to bring it to you kindly. And it'll look like I'm the reason Gerald didn't go home, because I'm the name on the chart and proximate is the word they chose and it sticks. Emmett was quiet for a long time. Not an empty quiet, a held one. A man sitting very still with something very heavy in both hands, making sure he didn't drop it. I know that word, he said finally. His voice had changed, not cold, not distant, but stripped of everything that wasn't necessary. I know how it gets used, he drew a breath. My grandmother built the foundation because she believed the company had power and power should come with repair, not just building. She would have wanted to know about Gerald, about all of it. He didn't move toward Thea. He'd learned that already, at the hotel. Tell me what you need. What she needed was the thing she'd been afraid to want out loud for 18 months. The thing that sat at the bottom of every careful day of broken badge clips and learned silences, and figuring out how to be useful in a world where she'd agreed never to say what she knew. Gerald had a wife, she said. He had 2 daughters. I've thought about them every day. Emmett nodded. And I want the review reopened, she said. I signed a settlement. I know what I signed and what it cost me to sign it. But I wrote my assessment before I wrote what the physician told me to write, and I wrote it at a timestamp that proves it came first. The document exists. I kept a copy. Her voice did not shake. It went lower, which was the only other thing it knew how to do when everything else was at capacity. I want someone to read it in order, the right order, not the one they chose. Then that's what we'll do, Emmett said. Tonight, before Adrian builds the other version. He looked at her steadily, at her still hands and her very steady voice and the green lanyard she was no longer wearing. Will you come back inside? Adrian found them at the kitchen table at 8:30. Rupert's reading glasses on her nose because she'd needed them, and was the only one wearing any. The settlement document spread between them and the Meridian Review, flagged in 3 places with the timestamps circled. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Then she came in and sat down and asked to read it herself. She read for 12 minutes. The kitchen was quiet. Rupert had gone to bed. He'd said goodnight with the satisfied expression of a man who'd set something complicated in motion and was content to let it resolve without him. Adrian set the papers down. You wrote your assessment first, she said. 3 times, before the physician's order. Yes. And they made you the proximate cause anyway. Thea said nothing. Gerald worked on our site, Adrian said. Not a question. Something in her face had gone thin, the way a thing goes when it was load-bearing and a weight has shifted. The composed surface of her showed its depth for the first time since she'd arrived. The physician who overrode you, she said. I've written a reference for him. He's dined at my table. She pressed her fingers flat on the linen. I have spent 9 years protecting this family from people who want to use the Lacey name. And it turns out what I should have been protecting them from was already inside the contract. With a reference letter I signed in 2022. She looked at Thea. Not warmly, that wasn't in her yet, and it might take time, and that was fair, but genuinely, a thing she couldn't manage away. Tell me what you need from the Foundation, Adrian said, because I'm going to open the internal review regardless. I should have opened it 18 months ago. I didn't know. That's the honest version. and I prefer honesty to generosity with myself. She gathered the documents, straightened them with the particular precision of someone who handles paper the way other people handle evidence. What do you need? Thea thought about Gerald's wife, about the letter she'd never been allowed to send, about the word that had been taken from her and buried under a settlement clause, and a signature she'd given because she'd had no one in that room on her side. I need someone to tell her the truth, she said, in writing, the real version, not the one the hospital sent. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded once. It cost something. Thea could see it cost something real and measurable, and it was paid without drama, which made it mean more. The review reopened 6 weeks later. Thea read her original assessment aloud in a panelled room that smelled of institutional coffee and old furniture, and she read it in order. First the warning, then the override, then the charted instruction, and no one in that room, not once, used the word proximate after she'd finished. Gerald's wife received a letter. A true one, this time. Thea was allowed to write part of it. She'd thought about what she would say for 18 months without meaning to, and it came out in 2 paragraphs that were not graceful and did not need to be. The physician's position at the company contracted through Lacey Holdings was reviewed. That review took its own shape, at its own pace, in rooms Thea was not part of, and she was grateful not to be. She did not go back to emergency services. She'd turned the word paramedic over and over in her hands for weeks, the way you turn something back to yourself that you thought you'd given away permanently. The Dundas Street Community Health Centre had an opening for a patient navigator, someone who could read a room, who understood what to ask first and in what order, who had current first aid and the particular reflex for knowing which question mattered. The kind of person who didn't need to decide whether to help before doing it, because the deciding had been replaced by something older and more reliable. She started on a Monday morning in February, the Meridian lanyard, newly laminated in a clip that didn't break, because Rupert had insisted on it, and sent the driver with a new one. Hung at her collar in a building 4 blocks from the parkade, where she'd found him on a June night that had turned out to be the beginning of something she hadn't been able to see the shape of yet. She and Emmett were at the Carrington the night before she started. Not the Churchill Lounge, the lobby bar, which was ordinary and loud, and had a piano on the mezzanine, and a painting of the harbour that no one had the heart to replace. He'd offered to book somewhere better. She'd said the lobby bar was fine. They sat for 2 hours. He had the thing he'd been building towards saying for 3 months, and she could tell, because his jaw did the particular thing it did when he was making himself wait for the right moment instead of the easy one. Say the small true thing, she said finally. In my experience, that's usually the version that works. He looked at her across the ordinary table in the ordinary bar. The lobby went on around them. Ice in glasses, the piano changing keys, the low particular sound a hotel makes when it's full of people pretending they don't need anything. I built a version of you from a security camera, he said. 11 seconds. Back of a coat. Someone steady and competent and gone before anyone could write her down, and I spent 5 months trying to find that person. He held her gaze. And then I found you. And you are so much more complicated and braver and harder to know than the version I made up, and I am not disappointed. Something in the tiredness that had lived in his face since the lounge began finally to lift. I'm undone. Thea's hands, which had been steady for the whole of the last 3 months, were not quite steady. She reached across the table past the untouched glasses and she took his hand. The deliberate first touch. Chosen. Her scarred thumb against his knuckles. He went still the way she went still. The whole loud lobby dropping to a murmur behind them, the piano becoming something you could actually hear. I start tomorrow, she said, and I'd like someone to call on the hard days. And I'd like to come back here sometimes to this terrible ordinary bar and not pretend I don't need anything. Her thumb pressed once against his hand. That's my small true thing. It's not very grand. It's exactly grand enough, Emmett said. He turned his hand over so their palms met. Neither of them let go. Across the lobby, in the chair he'd occupied for 40 minutes, with a newspaper he was not reading, Rupert Lacey, who absolutely should not have been there, who had told his driver he had an appointment at the hotel, and then simply sat down, folded the paper and set it on the arm of the chair, with the satisfied expression of a man who has been patient for a very long time and found it was worth it. He flagged the passing server. Is the bar still open? He asked. The server said yes. Good, said Rupert, settling back into the chair, facing the lobby and all its ordinary brightness. I'm celebrating. He didn't explain what. He found, in his experience, that the things most worth celebrating explained themselves if you gave them the room to. If you believe the steadiest people in any room, the ones who kneel on cold concrete, who write the true thing down before they write what they're told, who stay until the doors close and then walk quietly into the night, deserve to be found, then come back to us. At Platinum Files, there's always a seat saved. We held it for you.